A couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to see Andy Fastow, former Chief Financial Officer of Enron, speak. He began his talk by saying that he was raised in a very ethical home, and that when he was at Enron, he thought he was a very ethical person. Andy also said he holds himself most responsible for Enron's $40 billion downfall, arguably the biggest business ethics scandal in history. For his role in that scandal, he faced 78 counts of fraud and spent 6 years in jail. Andy began his talk by holding his trophy for CFO of the Year in one hand and his prison card in the other, and told the story of how he got both in the same year. While some might see this as just another example of the greed of big business, my experience tells me that this leaves something out. You see, I too used to think I was really ethical. In fact, if there's anyone who should have been ethical, it was me. I studied ethics in university and spent 6 years working in the ethics office of a large corporation. As part of my role there, I routinely answered questions from employees. I was on the ethics side of the desk, they were on the business side, and because I wasn't actually in the situation, it was easy for me to say no. And then something happened that made me realize that the ethical choice isn't always clear, and that sometimes we don't do the thing we think we will do when we are actually in it. I went to do my master's in Utrecht University in the Netherlands. We routinely did case studies. One of these was about the ethics of egg donation. It was the first time I had ever heard the term, which, for those who don't know, involves an intense process where one woman donates her eggs to help another woman conceive. Things are relatively clear for known donors, where the woman is a sister or friend. But when it comes to the compensation of anonymous donors, the ethical waters get muddy. I sat at my classroom table, windmills out the window, and used my training in ethical theory to consider all the factors. I thought through the possible impact to the donor's fertility and the risk that financial compensation might hamper her ability to make an informed choice. And in response to this particular case study question about whether or not it is ethical to compensate an egg donor for her eggs, I said no. Fast forward 6 months. My husband and I returned from the Netherlands to start our next adventure, starting a family. When things weren't going as planned, I went to the doctor for some tests. I can still feel it. The feeling of dread in my stomach as we waited to see the specialist. A deep knowing that the doctor was going to confirm something I'd known intuitively for some time. Morgan, he said, tears in his eyes. Your tests confirm the diagnosis. There's a less than 5% chance that you'll get pregnant on your own. And if you want a baby, egg donation is your best option. It is one thing to say something is unethical when you're sitting on one side of the desk or writing a case study. It is something entirely different when ethics seems to stand between you and the thing you want more than anything you've ever wanted in your entire life. What I want to suggest is that ethics is rarely black and white, and that we have a better chance of making better decisions if we realize this is the case and dive courageously into the gray. The fact that Andy saw himself as ethical while at Enron, and that I found it easy to judge situations as unethical until I was in them myself, teaches us something important, which is that as humans, our motivations are mixed. We are both moral and self-interested, and this means two things. First, we often don't see the ethical aspects of our decisions. And second, we often don't make the decision we thought we would, even if we do. So, why does this matter? It matters because individuals and corporations are making far fewer tangible improvements in ethics than we would be if this was understood. So, even though it feels like we're going a world away from Enron and egg donation, I want you to stick with me as we look at the implications of this in my world, which is no longer ethics, corporate ethics, but the ethics of fashion. A few years after returning home from the Netherlands, I took a sewing class. My first project was a blue dress. I chose the pattern, cut the fabric, pinned and stitched it. And as I did so, I began to think, embarrassingly, for the first time, about who made my clothes. This question led me to start The Garment, a company whose mission is to change the face of fashion by connecting women and responsible brands. We search the world to find the beautiful, quality, responsibly made pieces. We shoot these garments on real women of all colors, shapes, and sizes, and we connect them to our community members with a discount. And we do almost all of it on Instagram. Instagram is growing with shocking ferocity and is, in my view, the new mall, with a strong potential to be an ethical one. There are hundreds of thousands of people interested in buying ethical things, hundreds of thousands of companies who consider themselves to be ethical, and hundreds of thousands of influencers connecting them over the internet. This is great, you might think. We can use this to help shift the fashion world from one that is fast and excessive to one that is slower and more sustainable. Not so fast. Think back to what we learned at the start about how difficult it is for us to see the ethical aspects of our decisions or make the decision we thought we would, even if we do. So let's look at the implications of this for the three main players in this new fashion economy: influencers, consumers, and brands. First, influencers. Last fall, social media influencers arrived, decked out, cell phones in hand, to a beautiful storefront in Santa Monica to attend the launch of a new luxury store called Paylessy. Unbeknownst to them, it was actually a trick, and the store was filled with $35 Payless shoes. "They're elegant and sophisticated," said one influencer, holding up a shoe with a $500 price tag. "I could tell they were made from high-quality material," said another. Now, I don't think these influencers were misleading people intentionally. It's just that the fancy store, paired with the fact that they were being compensated, made them actually think the shoes were pretty good. Next, let's look at consumers. Show of hands, who here thinks sweatshop labor is wrong? Yeah, me too. Well, what if I told you that in all likelihood, both of us are pretty willing to toss that out the window when we see something from a sweatshop that we want? In her study titled "Sweatshop Labor is Wrong Unless the Shoes Are Cute," Neeru Praharia showed that where before seeing a cute pair of shoes, people, like us, simply say that sweatshop labor is wrong, whereas afterwards they modify their morals and justify the purchase. They do this by telling themselves that the sweatshop labor results in jobs that wouldn't otherwise be available to people in poor countries, and also in products that wouldn't otherwise be affordable to low-income people. Sound familiar? Yeah, I've done it too. Lastly, let's look at brands. Many of us are familiar with the term greenwashing, which is used to describe brands that exaggerate their environmental commitment. In recent years, I have watched size washing grow. This appeared to be the case last year when a well-known sustainable brand announced their launch into the plus-size market with an inclusive sizing collection. The move was celebrated by plus-size women around the globe. Unfortunately, perhaps due to fears about the financial viability of the plus-size market, their commitment seemed to stop there. The number of plus-size dresses on their website was at one point dwarfed by the company's New Year's Eve dress collection, leaving all the women who had first felt excited thinking, WTF. Now, Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing these three players for behaving the way they do. I'm only using them to show that most times, because of our desire to either make or save money, and our perception that ethics is a threat to that, those of us who think we're pretty ethical don't always live up to our own standards. The effect of this in the fashion space is this. Influencers are so swayed by their compensation that we can't really trust them. Consumers will only buy ethical fashion if it's cheap enough and right in front of them. And brands make the ethical changes they think they can afford and publicize the hell out of it. The result is that the cycle of relatively poor quality, fast fashion continues. This is discouraging. And, thankfully, we can do better. I built the garment on the understanding that ethics isn't black and white. And my experience tells me that we have the best chance of building a better story if we acknowledge the tension between ethics and self-interest and dive vulnerably into the gray. Here's what this looks like when I'm standing at the mall. I know that I'm a person who says, like you, that sweatshop labor is wrong. I also know that the fact that these shoes are cute is going to make me want to think that buying them is okay. Simply the act of realizing that my self-interest has a role here can be enough to snap me out of it. I can remind myself of this at the mall, but also at the office when I'm preparing my financial results, or when standing in a group of friends trying to decide whether to speak up after someone tells a racist joke, or when I'm standing in front of the kitchen sink trying to decide whether to wash out the peanut butter jar before putting it in recycling. If all of us acknowledge this tension between ethics and self-interest, we're in a better position to do better. If we have the courage to acknowledge this tension in community, my experience tells me that it not only results in a special type of human connection, but also an ethical ripple effect that simply isn't possible if we make these hard decisions on our own. Now, these decisions still aren't easy, but the garment's business model helps make them just a little bit easier by making the economics of ethics work. When brands like the New Year's Eve dress company say that they can't afford more inclusive sizing, the garment sponsors those larger patterns and helps the brands make more money and bigger ethical shifts by selling those new and improved, larger garments to members of our community. When individual consumers say that ethical fashion is too expensive, too hard to find, and not cute enough, we find the cute, quality, responsibly made things and connect them to our community members with a discount, something which makes it easier for them to follow through on their anti-sweatshop labor convictions. The model helps make it easier for people and companies to behave the way they want to, and it works. Last year, in its first corporate year, the garment did over $1 million in responsible garment sales. I want to come back to Andy from Enron. Intrigued by how someone as smart as Andy could get himself in a situation where he spent 6 years in prison, I sent him a message. "Hi, Morgan," he responded. "Yes, I don't think the challenge is getting people to do the right thing. 99% of us always want to do the right thing. The challenge is even realizing we have this decision to make. What we've learned here today is that that's hard to see because of our self-interest, and that we can be better when we realize this is the case." Speaking of which, you might be wondering what happened with the egg donation. We spent the first few months after our appointment with a specialist grieving. Then I acknowledged the tension between my ethical concerns for the donor's well-being and our self-interested yearning for a baby, opened my heart, and dove in. I emailed a friend from the Netherlands who has her PhD in bioethics, and together we drafted a series of robust questions about compensation and informed consent, which my husband and I proceeded to ask every clinic we looked at. In addition to questions about ethics, we also asked them questions about their success rates, and didn't stop until we found one with high levels of both. And, in case you're wondering, it cost more. The quality and ethical things usually do. So, that blue dress I told you I made in the sewing class, it was for my daughter. Her sister now wears it. And because of our dive into the gray, we have not one wonderful daughter, but two. Thank you.